single dad was bullied by the CEO's wife in front of a room full of millionaires and billionaires. He stood there in his worn-out suit, holding his little boy's hand, while cruel laughter echoed through the hall. The rich guests whispered, some smirked, but no one dared to speak against her power. It felt like his dignity was being ripped apart piece by piece. But then, in that heavy silence, something shocking happened. A maid's daughter, quiet, overlooked, invisible to them all, stepped forward. Her words were simple, but they shook the room like thunder. Everyone froze. No one could have imagined that this girl, living in poverty, would dare to shame the CEO's wife in a way that would change everything. Before we dive into the story, make sure to hit subscribe button and like the video, and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Now, let's jump into the story. Michael lived in a one-bedroom walk-up in Brooklyn that always smelled a little like old paint and boiled pasta. The rent was late more months than not. The heat clanged in winter, the fan rattled in summer, and the windows stuck every time he tried to open them. Still, to him, it was home. He kept the place clean, lined up shoes by the door, and folded blankets tight so his little boy wouldn't trip. A photo of his late wife sat on the dresser beside a jar of coins. Every morning, he slipped $2 from the jar for bus fare and coffee, then told himself he would fill it back up by Friday. Most Fridays, he could not. Michael worked construction all over the city, Queens, the Bronx, anywhere that would take an extra set of hands. He took the early shifts and the late ones, building luxury condos he would never set foot in after they were done. Sometimes he looked up at the glass towers, all shine and sky, and felt both proud and invisible. He made things. He held beams steady. He lifted what others could not. But his name was not on those buildings. His name was on call sheets, on receipts, on school forms. Single dad, guardian, emergency contact. Daniel, a second grader with soft brown hair and a careful smile, woke early to trace his spelling words on the kitchen table. He liked to whisper them, river, window, bright, like they were seeds he could plant inside his mouth and grow into something strong. He did not complain when the milk was watered down. He did not complain when they had rice and eggs 3 nights in a row. Sometimes his chest hurt after gym. Sometimes he sat very still when other kids ran. Michael told himself it was just a growth phase, just a season, just something that would pass. He watched for wheezing. He watched for signs. He watched the calendar for a clinic day he could afford. Across the river, in Manhattan, the world felt different. On the Upper East Side, a billionaire's townhouse rose like a museum. Limestone steps, tall doors, windows polished to a mirror. Victoria owned the attention of rooms before she walked into them. She wore designer black like armor and carried a diamond that caught every light. People said she could smile and end a career in the same minute. She was married to Grant, a high-profile CEO who spoke on business channels about growth and vision, the kind of man newspapers called a self-made millionaire before they called him a billionaire. Grant was sharp, careful, always measuring the air around him. He did good things in public. Checks to hospitals, scholarships for schools. Victoria liked the galas, the lists, the applause. Ella knew this world only from the edges. She was the maid's daughter, allowed to do her homework in the townhouse kitchen while her mom cleaned. She was 16, thin as a reed, with quick eyes that missed nothing. On quiet afternoons, she read library books while the chef prepped tiny hors d'oeuvres that looked like jewels. She knew the route of people who never touched subway poles. She knew how rich guests spoke when they thought no one poor could hear. She knew how staff looked down when Victoria came through a room, how even footsteps tried to be soft. One Friday, a month before the gala, Michael finished a shift on West 57th Street. The skyscraper had a private spa and a roof deck that faced the park. He watched the glass elevator climb and tried not to imagine a life inside it. A man from the site handed him a plain envelope. "Charity job," the man said. "They want extras. You look decent in a tie, right?" Inside was an invitation. Charity benefit for children's wellness, hosted by Grant and Victoria. Black tie, silent auction, live music. Michael didn't own a tie, but he did own hope. Maybe there would be donors who cared. Maybe there would be a clinic table, a voucher, a chance. Back in Brooklyn, he ironed the only suit he had left, the one he wore to his wife's funeral. The cuffs were shiny, the shoulders a little tight, but it made him stand straighter. Daniel watched from the couch, legs tucked under a blanket. "Do you have to go?" the boy asked. "I'm going to talk to good people," Michael said. "People who help kids. People who like strong stories. I'll bring back a story for you." He pressed his palm to Daniel's chest for a heartbeat longer than usual. The rhythm was there, fast but steady. He kissed his son's hair, then left a sticky note on the fridge with the neighbor's number. The gala took place in a hotel ballroom near Central Park, the kind with chandeliers like upside-down gardens and carpets that swallowed footsteps. Stretch limos lined the curb. Cameras flashed. The air smelled like roses and money. Michael walked in holding the invitation like a ticket to a new life. He pretended he belonged. He pretended he wasn't counting the minutes he had to get back to Brooklyn. He found the charity table, spoke to a volunteer, filled out a form about Daniel's symptoms. The volunteer smiled in a practiced way and told him to check back later. On the other side of the room, Victoria moved like the queen of a chessboard, one step at a time, never rushed, never unsure. She recognized a certain kind of man at first glance, the ones who looked around before they looked ahead. When she saw Michael, alone in a suit that had seen sadness, she looked past him as if he were a coat rack. When he approached the hors d'oeuvres, she turned her shoulders, and her circle turned with her. He stepped back. Ella arrived with her mom through the service entrance. Her mom carried a checklist. Ella carried a stack of folded napkins. The staff briefed them on timing, placement, order. "Always the left side for the bread," her mom whispered, like a spell passed down. Ella nodded and moved where she was told, sliding like a shadow through the bright smell of white lilies. She saw Michael and paused. He had the look she knew from bus stops at midnight, the look of people trying not to be seen, needing something. Grant stood on a small platform to thank the donors and talk about impact. Charts appeared on screens, numbers that climbed up bars like ladders. He said, "Community, change, life-saving." The words were right. The tone was clean. Still, Ella watched his eyes flick to Victoria between sentences, as if checking if the words were enough. Michael waited for a moment that felt human. He found it at the edge of the room, near a display about children's heart screenings. A glass box held a model of a tiny heart. He lifted the pamphlet. "Read about early tests, costs, waiting lists." He thought about the ache in Daniel's chest after kickball, the careful way his son breathed on bad days. He felt something heavy and old pull at his ribs. He didn't cry. He never cried in public. But his throat made a small sound he didn't recognize. Ella saw him with the pamphlet. She drifted closer, pretending to check table settings. She noticed his hands, rough and nicked, holding the paper so gently, as if it were a fragile bird. She wanted to say, "There are good people here," but she had learned not to promise what she couldn't give. She wanted to say, "My library has books about this," but books were not doctors. So she said nothing and kept moving, folding napkins into white boats that would carry nothing but forks. At the auction table, a row of glittering items lay under bright light. A weekend in the Hamptons, a yacht dinner, a box at Madison Square Garden, a necklace that looked like a constellation. Michael had never seen numbers like that next to things that were not houses. He picked up a pen to write his name on a clipboard, then put it down when he saw the starting bid. A waiter passed with champagne. Michael shook his head and reached for water. Victoria noticed the movement, the reach, the pause. She walked to the table and spoke in a voice that sounded sweet from a distance. "These items require a certain commitment," she said. Her friends smiled without smiling. "Sometimes it's better to enjoy the view than try to climb the mountain." He turned to her. "I'm here for the children's screenings," he said. "I'm here for my son." She smiled in a way that cut. "Of course you are. Everyone is here for something." Grant approached, put a hand on Victoria's elbow. "We appreciate every guest," he said. He was polite, practiced, kind in a way that could be filed. "Please make yourself comfortable." Michael thanked him and stepped back. He felt heat behind his eyes, the kind that made words heavy. He looked down at his shoes, scuffed clean, and tried to stand taller. He pictured Daniel's careful smile. He pictured the jar of coins. Ella, refilling water at a nearby table, heard the tone in Victoria's voice. She had heard that tone in grocery stores when people watched her mom count coupons. She had heard it when teachers compared shoes. It was a tone that made people small. She folded a napkin, set it down, and watched. During dinner, a donor at Michael's table asked what he did. "Construction," he said. The donor nodded like that was a story he already knew. Another asked where he lived. "Brooklyn," he said. The donor nodded like that was a place he had heard of in a song. The salads were so pretty they felt like they might break. Michael ate slowly. He kept the pamphlet by his plate the way other people kept their phones. Speeches began again. Awards, thank yous. A video played of smiling kids in hospital gowns high-fiving nurses. Michael clapped with the room. He meant it. He wanted to believe in this place. He wanted to leave with a number to call Monday morning. A person who would say, "Come in at 9, we'll take care of your boy." As the video ended, Victoria took the microphone for a special note. She spoke about standards and values and the image of giving. She talked about people who take advantage of charity. Her eyes moved like searchlights and landed, briefly, on Michael. The air in the room changed. Tiny ripples moved across the round tables. At the back, Ella's mom touched her arm. "Keep your head down," she whispered. "We need this job." Ella nodded, but her chest tightened. She thought of times kids at school laughed when she pulled a book from a plastic bag. She thought of the day her mom cried at the kitchen sink over a late light bill and then wiped her face and kept cleaning. She thought of the way Michael held the pamphlet like a promise. Dessert plates were cleared. The room buzzed low like a giant beehive. Michael stepped toward the charity desk again, ready to ask one more time. A volunteer told him to wait. He waited. 10 minutes, 20. He watched the volunteer help other guests who wore brighter suits and bigger watches. He told himself not to be angry. Anger burned what little fuel he had. On the platform, Grant glanced toward Victoria, whose smile had sharpened. "One last announcement," she said, voice rising like a toast. "We are proud to welcome those who support our mission, and we are careful about those who misuse it." Her gaze landed on Michael again, longer this time. The implication fell heavy. A handful of faces turned to look. A murmur moved like a wave. Michael felt the room tilt. He had done nothing wrong, but shame crawled under his skin as if it belonged there. He set the pamphlet down. He did not know where to put his hands. He did not know which door would be the least noticed if he left. The chandelier light made everything too bright to hide. He thought of Daniel asleep in their small apartment. He thought of the bus schedule. He thought of the jar half empty. Ella's heart hammered. She knew this was the moment that decided whether people like them disappeared into the walls or took up space. She remembered a sentence from a book about courage she had finished on the train. Bravery is choosing a voice when silence is safer. She looked at her mom. Her mom shook her head, small and pleading. Ella's fingers pressed against the linen of her apron. She felt the tremble and made it stop. Michael turned to go. He reached the edge of the ballroom, where the giant doors stood open to a corridor like a quiet river. He could still leave without making trouble. He could still tell Daniel he tried. He took one step toward the shadow. Behind him, a chair scraped. A glass chimed. A hush fell that no one had planned. Victoria's voice floated across the room again, light but sharp. "Some people show up to take, not give," she said. "Tonight is not for them." Michael paused. The words landed like a hand on his back, pushing. He closed his eyes for one long breath. Ella stepped forward. She was small in a room built to make small things smaller. She moved past the line of tables, past the wall of faces, past her mom's outstretched hand. She reached the edge of the platform where the microphone waited in a stand. Her throat was dry. Her knees were steady. The crowd's whisper rose and curled around her like smoke. Grant lowered his notes. Victoria tilted her head, almost amused. Michael turned, surprise cutting through his shame. Ella lifted her chin. She did not touch the microphone yet. She did not blink. The ballroom held its breath, as if the whole night had slid to this exact point and hung there, waiting to see whether a maid's daughter would speak and whether anyone in a room full of millionaires and a billionaire CEO would dare to listen. Ella's small frame looked fragile against the towering platform, but her voice was steady. "Kindness," she said, without taking the microphone, "is not measured in diamonds or yachts. It is measured in how we treat people who have nothing." The words sliced through the ballroom like lightning. For a moment, forks hung in the air, glasses stopped halfway to lips, and every laugh froze into silence. The crowd shifted uneasily. Some lowered their eyes, embarrassed. Others glanced toward Victoria, waiting for her response. Michael felt the blood rush in his ears. He wanted to protect this girl, who had no reason to defend him, yet he could not move. Something in her defiance glued him to the floor. Victoria's lips curved in a thin smile. "And who are you?" she asked, voice smooth as silk. "To lecture the people who feed your family." Her tone drew soft chuckles from her circle. Ella finally touched the microphone. "I'm the daughter of the woman who scrubs your floors," she said. "And tonight, I think you've forgotten what this charity is about." The air in the ballroom snapped. Gasps scattered across the tables. The CEO, Grant, shifted uncomfortably, tugging at his cuff. He hadn't expected a maid's daughter to challenge his wife in front of billionaires and cameras. Everyone froze. Michael's heart thudded as Ella stepped back from the microphone, her hands trembling but her chin high. A waiter whispered, "Unbelievable," as if he couldn't believe someone had dared to expose the cruel undertone of the evening. Grant cleared his throat, attempting to soften the moment. "Let's stay focused on the children's cause," he said, his voice careful. But the damage was done. People weren't talking about the cause anymore. They were whispering about the maid's daughter. Victoria's smile never faltered, but her eyes burned. She leaned close to her husband and whispered something only he could hear. Grant nodded, but his jaw tightened. Michael wanted to walk away, to take his humiliation and retreat into the shadows. But when his eyes met Ella's, he saw courage reflected back at him. This girl, who had no armor, had stood where he could not. That realization carved something new inside him, a mixture of pride, shame, and an ache he could not name. The rest of the evening unraveled awkwardly. Guests avoided Victoria's gaze, whispering about what had just happened. Ella's mom pulled her aside, furious and afraid. "Do you want me to lose this job?" she hissed. "Do you know what she can do to us?" "I couldn't let her crush him," Ella whispered back, glancing toward Michael. Someone had to say it. Michael slipped quietly out of the ballroom before dessert was served. The pamphlet about children's heart screenings was folded in his pocket like a fragile hope. On the subway ride home, he stared at the gray floor and replayed the humiliation in his mind. The laughter, the pointed words, the pitying glances. He clenched his fists, then relaxed them, forcing his breath steady. Daniel was waiting. Daniel needed him calm. When Michael reached his apartment, Daniel was still awake, curled on the couch with a blanket. "Did the rich people help?" he asked sleepily. Michael hesitated. "Not tonight," he said softly. "But I met someone brave. Maybe that matters." He stroked his son's hair, wondering how much longer he could shield him from the truth. The next morning, gossip spread like wildfire. Online society pages whispered about a maid's daughter who shamed a CEO's wife. Anonymous blogs replayed bits of overheard dialogue, painting Victoria as cruel and Ella as courageous. Some praised the girl's boldness, others mocked the audacity. At the townhouse, Victoria paced the marble foyer, heels striking like hammers. "I will not be humiliated by a janitor's child," she fumed. "This ends now." Grant tried to calm her. "The story will fade. People love scandal for a day, then they move on." But Victoria wasn't convinced. "Not unless I make sure it fades," she said coldly. Days later, Michael noticed subtle changes. At work, his foreman muttered about budget cuts and reducing staff. His name was missing from the new schedule. Friends avoided eye contact. Calls went unanswered. It didn't take long to realize. Victoria had reached into his world with invisible strings, pulling opportunities away one by one. He came home one evening with dirt under his nails and fear in his chest. Daniel was coloring at the kitchen table, crayons spread wide. "I drew us a house," he said proudly, holding up a picture of a big, sunny home. "When I grow up, I'll buy it for you." Michael smiled, his throat tight. "That's beautiful, buddy." But inside, he wondered how long they could even keep the apartment. Meanwhile, Ella faced her own storm. At school, whispers followed her in hallways. Some kids admired her bravery. Others mocked her for playing hero. Teachers looked at her differently, some with admiration, others with warning. At home, her mom cried silently while scrubbing the townhouse, terrified of losing the only income that kept them afloat. One evening, Ella sat on the apartment fire escape, knees hugged to her chest. She replayed Victoria's sneer in her head. For the first time, doubt seeped in. Had she made things worse? Had her voice condemned not just her, but her mother too? But then she remembered Michael's face, that moment when shame turned to hope because someone had stood for him. That memory steadied her. She whispered to herself, "Kindness is stronger than fear." A week later, fate threw them together again. Michael was leaving a community clinic when he saw Ella waiting outside the grocery store, carrying 2 heavy bags for her mom. He hesitated, then walked over. "Hey," he said softly, "you were brave that night." Ella looked up, startled. "Brave or stupid?" "Both," Michael admitted, and for the first time in days, a small smile tugged at his lips. They stood in silence for a moment. 2 lives from opposite worlds intersecting in the most ordinary place. Michael finally spoke. "My boy, Daniel, he's getting worse. The doctors say we need tests I can't afford." Ella's eyes softened. "I know someone," she said carefully. "My teacher volunteers at a hospital program. Maybe she can help. Let me ask." Michael nodded, hope flickering like a fragile flame. But Victoria wasn't done. She had eyes everywhere, ears in every corner. When word reached her that Michael had been spotted with the maid's daughter again, her anger boiled. "If they think they can embarrass me twice, they're mistaken," she hissed. She began whispering to donors, hinting that Michael was exploiting charity, that Ella was desperate for attention. Her lies spread, subtle but poisonous. People believed her because she spoke with confidence, dressed in diamonds, lived in glass towers. One cold evening, Daniel collapsed on the playground. Michael carried him in his arms to the nearest emergency room, his heart pounding. Doctors rushed to stabilize the boy, whispering about scans, conditions, costs. Michael sat in the waiting room, head in his hands, praying for a miracle. And then, as if pulled by destiny, Ella appeared with her mother. They had heard. She walked straight to Michael, ignoring the stares. "You're not alone," she said firmly. For the first time in years, Michael allowed himself to cry in front of someone. But the hospital door swung open, and in walked Victoria. Dressed in a fur coat, diamonds flashing, she looked completely out of place in the crowded waiting room. She surveyed the scene with cold amusement. "So this is what rock bottom looks like," she said softly, just loud enough for others to hear. Michael stood, fury trembling through him. "This is my son," he said, voice breaking. "And if you had even a fraction of kindness, you'd understand what matters." Victoria smirked. "Kindness doesn't pay hospital bills." The room went quiet. Doctors, nurses, patients all turned to look. Everyone froze. And in that heavy silence, Ella stepped forward again, her eyes locked on Victoria. She opened her mouth, and the screen of the waiting room monitor suddenly lit up with Daniel's name, flashing red. His condition was worsening. Doctors rushed past. Michael's knees almost gave out. The rising storm had reached its peak. The next moment would decide everything. The emergency room doors banged open, and Daniel's bed was wheeled down the hall under harsh white lights. Michael ran beside it, his rough hands gripping the side rail, whispering, "Stay with me, buddy. Please, stay with me." Nurses moved with precision, but every step felt like a cliff edge beneath his feet. Behind him, Victoria stood in the waiting room, amused, as if the scene were some tragic play performed for her entertainment. The cruelty in her eyes made Michael want to scream. But before he could speak, Ella's voice cut through. "You don't get to laugh at him," she said, her tone shaking but strong. "This isn't about money. This is about a boy fighting for his life." Some in the waiting room clapped softly, others murmured. Victoria's lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't back down. "People like you romanticize struggle," she sneered. "It's pathetic." "The world runs on power, not pity." The words burned into Michael's chest, but he had no time for her. The red light above the operating room blinked on, and Daniel disappeared inside. The heavy door slammed shut, leaving Michael outside with only silence and fear. Hours crawled by like years. Michael sat hunched in a plastic chair, his hands rubbing against each other, as if prayer alone could change fate. He thought of the skyscrapers he had built, the nights he carried bricks until his back screamed, the coins saved in a jar. None of it mattered now. He would have given every drop of sweat for his son's heartbeat to stay strong. Ella sat nearby, refusing to leave. Her mother tried to pull her away, but she shook her head. "He needs someone," she whispered. She looked at Michael, saw the depth of his loneliness, and thought of all the nights she and her mom had sat at their kitchen table, lights dimmed to save the bill, clinging to each other because no one else cared. She recognized that same ache in his eyes. While Daniel fought inside the operating room, whispers spread through the hospital. Some staff recognized Victoria. Word traveled fast. The CEO's wife humiliating a single dad in a charity hall, and now appearing here, mocking him, while his boy lay between life and death. By morning, the story leaked online. Anonymous posts described Victoria's words. One headline read, "CEO's wife laughs at sick child's father." Grant saw it at breakfast. He set down his phone, his appetite gone. For the first time, doubt pierced his carefully polished world. Was wealth worth so much if it destroyed the people it was supposed to help? Meanwhile, Michael's job situation crumbled further. The construction site manager, pressured by unseen hands, cut him from the schedule completely. Friends he once trusted stopped calling. It was clear Victoria was tightening her grip, trying to erase him from every chance at survival. But Michael didn't give up. He took smaller jobs, fixing fences, painting garages, anything to scrape enough for medicine. Each evening, he returned to the hospital, exhausted but determined. Ella often found him asleep in a chair, head tilted against the wall, his son's chart in his lap. She began bringing small things, sandwiches wrapped in foil, water bottles, a library book for Daniel. "You don't have to," Michael told her once, his voice hoarse. "I want to," she replied simply. And in that moment, a bond deeper than words began to grow. One rainy night, while Michael waited outside Daniel's room, Victoria appeared again, this time with venom sharpened. "You'll never win," she whispered, leaning close so others couldn't hear. "You'll always be nothing more than a desperate man in a cheap suit. And when your boy is gone, you'll only have yourself to blame." Michael's fists clenched, every muscle begging for release. But he held back. He wouldn't give her the satisfaction. Instead, he looked her dead in the eye. "I may have nothing," he said, his voice low, "but at least my son will know I never gave up on him. Can you say the same about your life?" Her smile faltered, just for a second. Then she turned sharply, heels striking the floor like gavel blows, and disappeared down the corridor. The weeks dragged on, and Daniel's condition worsened. Doctors urged for specialized treatment at a private facility, but the cost was impossible. Michael felt the walls of poverty closing in, each day tighter, each night darker. One afternoon, he sat with Ella in the hospital cafeteria. Rain pounded against the windows, making the city outside blur into silver streaks. Michael finally broke. "He deserves better than me," he whispered. "If he had a billionaire father, maybe he'd have a chance." Ella leaned forward, her eyes steady. "Don't ever say that. You've given him more than any billionaire could. Love, that's the one thing money can't fake." Her words sank deep. For the first time, Michael realized she wasn't just a brave girl. She was a mirror, showing him the strength he had buried under shame. But outside those walls, Victoria was plotting her grand strike. She convinced Grant to host another gala, this one meant to repair the family's image. She promised it would silence the gossip, prove their generosity, restore their glory. Guests would attend in droves, money would pour in, and Michael, he would be exposed once and for all, painted as a manipulative fraud. Ella overheard her mother whispering about the event while cleaning the townhouse. That night, she rushed to the hospital. "They're planning something," she warned Michael. "Victoria won't stop until she crushes you." Michael exhaled heavily, the weight of it all pressing down. "Then I'll face her," he said, but not alone. He looked at Ella, the maid's daughter who had already risked everything. She nodded without hesitation. The night of the gala arrived. The hotel ballroom gleamed brighter than ever, chandeliers scattering light across gold-rimmed glasses and glittering gowns. But beneath the glamour pulsed tension. Guests whispered about the scandal, about the sick boy, about the maid's daughter who dared to speak truth. Michael walked in quietly, his suit still worn but freshly pressed. His shoulders straightened not with pride, but with determination. He was no longer hiding. Tonight, he would not be invisible. Across the room, Victoria's eyes narrowed the moment she saw him. She leaned toward her husband. "Watch," she hissed. "He'll humiliate himself. Then no one will dare pity him again." But what she hadn't expected was the sight of Ella stepping in beside Michael, her chin high, her gaze unshaken. Gasps rippled through the hall. Some whispered, some applauded quietly. The two of them together were a living contradiction to everything Victoria believed. Poverty daring to walk shoulder to shoulder with power. The speeches began, donors clinking glasses. Victoria stood on stage, radiant in a dress that shimmered like armor. She smiled as if nothing had touched her reputation. "Tonight, we prove again that power and generosity change lives," she announced. Michael stepped forward from the crowd. His voice rang out, clear and unshaken. "Power without kindness destroys lives." The room went dead silent. Guests turned, eyes wide, breaths held. Victoria's smile froze. For the first time in years, she looked uncertain. Everyone froze. Michael walked closer to the stage, his gaze locked on her. "My son is lying in a hospital bed because money decides who deserves to live. And you laughed at him." His voice broke, but he didn't stop. "What you don't understand is that love makes a man stronger than any diamond you wear." The room erupted into whispers. Phones lifted discreetly. The story was writing itself in real time. Victoria's eyes flicked desperately toward Grant, silently begging him to save her. But Grant's face was pale. For once, he looked ashamed. Michael turned to leave, but Ella touched his arm. "Not yet," she whispered. And then, like a storm breaking open, the ballroom doors slammed and a doctor rushed in, breathless, searching the crowd. His eyes found Michael. "It's your son," the doctor said urgently. "You need to come now. He's critical." Michael's world stopped. His knees nearly buckled. Gasps echoed through the room, guests frozen in place. He looked once at Victoria, whose face twisted between triumph and fear. Then he sprinted past the chandeliers, past the polished tables, past the stunned billionaires and millionaires, running toward the fight that mattered most. The story was no longer about shame or reputation. It was life or death. And as the doors closed behind him, the crowd knew the next chapter would change everything. The hospital corridors glowed under harsh fluorescent lights as Michael ran behind the doctor, his chest pounding with every step. The sound of his boots against the tile echoed like thunder. Each second felt like a stolen breath. His boy, his only boy, was slipping away, and he could do nothing but chase. They burst into the pediatric ICU, where machines hummed and monitors beeped in alarming rhythm. Daniel lay on the bed, his small chest rising shallowly under a maze of tubes. His lips were pale, his tiny fists limp against the blanket. Michael's knees buckled. He staggered forward, pressing his hand to his son's arm as if that touch alone could tether him back to life. "Please, fight," he whispered, tears brimming. "I can't lose you too, not you." The doctor spoke urgently about oxygen saturation, heart rhythms, surgical options, costs, words that splintered into noise. All Michael could hear was the uneven beep of the monitor. His boy was fading. Ella rushed in moments later, her eyes wide with fear. She pushed past a nurse and stood at the bedside, her fingers trembling as she clutched the rail. "He's strong," she said to Michael. "Don't let go of that. He's stronger than all of this." Her voice steadied him for a moment, but then the doors opened again. Victoria walked in, draped in jewels, her expression sharp, cold, immovable. The sight of her in that sterile room felt obscene, wealth glittering beside a child's fragile fight for survival. "Why are you here?" Michael spat, his grief cracking into anger. She lifted her chin. "Because I wanted to see if the little speech at the gala would finally break you." Nurses froze, shocked by her audacity. One whispered, "Is she serious?" under her breath. Michael's fists trembled. For a moment, he imagined dragging her out, but Daniel's weak breathing held him in place. "My son's life isn't your entertainment," he growled. Victoria's smile curved cruelly. "Life is entertainment. Power is the script. You, single dad, are just a background extra in my story." Ella stepped forward, fury sparking in her eyes. "No," she said, her voice sharp, slicing through the tension. "You've made a mistake. Kindness isn't weakness. It's the only power that lasts." Victoria laughed lightly, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. "Spare me the poetry, child. The world belongs to those who take." Ella's hands gripped the rail tighter. "Then why are you afraid of me? Why are you afraid of truth?" The room went silent. Nurses exchanged glances. Even the doctor paused, caught in the electric charge between them. Suddenly, the monitor screamed. Daniel's heart rate plummeted. Nurses swarmed, shouting commands. "Crash cart, vitals dropping." The sound was chaos, alarms wailing, rubber soles squeaking, trays clattering. Michael froze, his entire soul collapsing into panic. "No, don't take him, please," he screamed, his voice breaking into raw sobs. Everyone froze in horror as the flatline tone pierced the air. The CEO's wife, so smug seconds before, now looked pale, her confidence cracking. She whispered to herself, almost inaudibly, "This wasn't supposed to happen." Michael fell to his knees beside the bed, gripping his son's hand as if his grip could pull him back. Tears streamed down his face, dripping onto the cold hospital floor. His body shook with desperation. And then, through the storm, Ella's voice rang out. "Don't give up. Daniel, listen to me. You're more powerful than this sickness. You are loved. You are not alone." Her words carried through the room like a prayer, a command, a lifeline. Nurses pressed paddles to Daniel's chest, jolting his small body. Michael squeezed tighter, whispering, "Come back, buddy. Please, come back." The second shock hit. The monitor beeped once, then twice. The flatline fractured into a weak but steady rhythm. A collective gasp filled the room. Everyone froze. Daniel was still here. Michael buried his face in his son's blanket, sobbing with relief. Nurses steadied the boy's vitals, adjusting drips and oxygen lines. "He's stable for now," the doctor said, "but he needs a transfer to the specialized unit. Without it, this will happen again." Michael's heart twisted. How much? The figure the doctor named hit like a bullet. Impossible money. More than he could ever see in 10 lifetimes of labor. His stomach churned with helplessness. Ella looked at him, her eyes fierce. "We'll find a way." Michael shook his head, despair flooding him. "They've taken everything from me. I have no one left to turn to." From the corner, Victoria crossed her arms. "And that," she said, "is reality. Dreams don't save lives. Money does. And you will never have enough." Her words sliced the fragile hope in the room. For a moment, Michael nearly broke. But then, Daniel stirred faintly, his hand twitching in Michael's palm. That tiny movement reignited something raw, powerful, unstoppable in Michael's chest. He stood, his face streaked with tears, but his eyes burning. "I may not be a billionaire," he said, his voice shaking with power, "but I am his father, and I will fight until my last breath. You can try to bury me with shame, but you cannot break what love has built." The nurses, the doctor, even the staff, everyone listened, hearts pulled tight. It wasn't a speech, it was truth. Victoria's mask of arrogance faltered. She opened her mouth to reply, but no words came. For the first time, she looked smaller than the man she had tried to destroy. But just as hope glimmered, the doctor interrupted. "The hospital can't move forward without payment." His eyes were kind but firm. "You have 24 hours. After that, there's nothing more we can do." 24 hours. A clock began ticking in Michael's soul. He looked down at Daniel, breathing faintly beneath the wires, and his entire body shook. He turned to Ella, his voice cracking. "What do I do? How do I save him?" Ella's face was pale, but her resolve hardened. "Then we don't waste a second," she said. "We'll find a way, together." Michael nodded, though fear gripped him like chains. He knew this was the fight of his life, and just as the weight of that promise sank in, the ICU doors swung open again. Grant, the CEO himself, stood in the doorway. His face was drawn, conflicted, heavy with secrets he had carried too long. He looked from Michael to Daniel, then to Victoria. Silence stretched, suffocating, as the world seemed to hold its breath. Finally, Grant spoke, his voice low, almost trembling. "There's something you all need to know." The room froze in suspense. What he was about to reveal would shatter everything and decide whether Daniel lived or died. Grant's words hung in the air, like a storm cloud ready to burst. The CEO, usually composed like marble, now looked shaken, human, vulnerable. He stepped into the ICU, ignoring the nurse's warnings that visitors should wait outside. His eyes lingered on Daniel's fragile body, then moved to Michael, whose face was drawn with exhaustion and defiance. "I can't keep this inside any longer," Grant said quietly, his voice raw. "Victoria told me half-truths, but I also let myself believe them. I thought reputation mattered more than people. I let wealth blind me, and because of that, an innocent boy almost lost his life." The room went still. Even the machines seemed to hush, their steady beeps softer against his confession. Michael narrowed his eyes. "Then why are you here now? To watch him suffer? To justify your wife's cruelty?" Grant shook his head. "No. I'm here because I finally see the truth. I've built towers that scrape the sky, but none of them matter if I let a child fall. You asked what money is worth. Tonight I realized it's worth nothing if it can't be used for kindness." Victoria's jaw tightened, fury flashing across her face. "Don't you dare lecture them, Grant. Don't humiliate this family because of one poor man's sob story." Grant turned sharply toward her. For the first time in years, his voice cut with steel. "No, Victoria. The humiliation isn't his. It's ours." Everyone froze. Michael's breath caught, unsure if this was a trick or a lifeline. Ella, standing tall despite trembling hands, whispered, "This could be the moment." Grant walked closer to the bed, his eyes heavy with guilt. "I'll pay for Daniel's transfer," he announced. "Every test, every treatment, covered." The words struck like lightning. Michael staggered back, overwhelmed. "Why? Why now?" Grant lowered his voice. "Because you reminded me what I've lost. I used to believe in helping, in lifting people up. Somewhere along the way, I let greed rot that belief. But tonight, watching you fight for your son, I realized you're richer than I've ever been." Tears burned Michael's eyes, but he shook his head. "If this is just pity, I don't want it. My boy deserves more than pity." But before hope could take root, Victoria's voice slashed the air. "You will not use our fortune to throw it at some street rat's child," she shouted, her face red with rage. "Do you want the world to think we sponsor beggars now? Do you want to destroy us completely?" The nurses looked away, ashamed for her. The doctor cleared his throat, trying to diffuse tension. "We can't wait much longer," he warned. "This boy needs to be moved within the next few hours." Michael gripped his son's hand tighter, torn between disbelief and desperate hope. Ella's eyes darted between Grant and Victoria. The battle wasn't about money anymore. It was about hearts. Grant finally stood tall, his CEO authority surging back, but this time with conviction instead of arrogance. "Victoria, enough," he declared. "This isn't about us. This is about doing the right thing. And if you can't see that, then maybe you've forgotten what it means to be human." The crowd of hospital staff, patients' families, even janitors peeking from the hall, everyone felt the shift. For the first time, the CEO wasn't a symbol of unreachable power. He was a man confronting cruelty in his own house. Victoria's hands trembled. "If you do this, Grant, you will regret it. You'll ruin us." Grant shook his head. "No, if I don't do this, I've already ruined myself." He turned to the doctor. "Prepare the transfer. He gets the best care, immediately." Michael's knees gave out, and he sank into a chair, covering his face with his hands. Relief poured through him like rain on dry ground. Ella touched his shoulder, her smile breaking through tears. For the first time, light cracked through the darkness. Hours later, Daniel was wheeled into the specialized unit, machines buzzing gently around him, specialists working with calm focus. Michael stayed glued to his side, whispering promises into his boy's ear. Ella never left, her presence a steady flame. Outside the room, Grant signed papers, his pen moving quickly, his fortune pouring into something real, something meaningful. The act itself was a revolution, the billionaire finally using wealth as a weapon for kindness. But Victoria was far from defeated. Her pride, sharper than glass, refused to crack. She stormed out of the hospital that night, vowing silently that this humiliation would not be her legacy. She would strike back, harder than ever. For 2 days, hope glimmered. Daniel's color returned, his breathing steadied, his small fingers curled around Michael's hand. Doctors smiled cautiously, saying progress was real but fragile. Michael slept in short bursts, his exhaustion softened by relief. But on the third night, chaos erupted. Reporters swarmed the hospital, flashing cameras through glass doors, shouting questions about the CEO's charity scandal. Someone had leaked the story in full, every cruel word Victoria had spoken, every detail of Ella's defiance. Michael shielded his eyes from the glare, clutching his son protectively. Nurses tried to push cameras back, but the frenzy grew. Grant arrived, stunned. "I didn't authorize this," he muttered. "I wanted privacy." Victoria's voice echoed from the crowd. She had orchestrated the leak, twisting it to make herself the victim. "Look at him," she cried dramatically, pointing at Michael. "He's exploiting my husband's generosity. He's parading his child's sickness to gain sympathy." Gasps rippled. The spin was vicious, and some reporters scribbled furiously. Michael's stomach dropped. She was turning kindness into a weapon against him. Ella stepped forward, her small frame shielding Michael and Daniel from the storm. She shouted over the chaos. "He didn't ask for your money. He didn't beg for attention. He only fought for his son's life, and you tried to crush him. Her voice carried above the crowd, trembling but fierce. If kindness is exploitation, then maybe this world needs more of it. The crowd faltered. Some lowered their cameras, some clapped softly, others muttered. But the seed was planted, truth piercing through lies. Victoria's face twisted. "You insolent child," she hissed, lunging as if to drag Ella away. And then the hospital's loudspeaker crackled. "Code blue, room 312. Michael froze. Room 312, Daniel's room. He sprinted down the hall, shoving past reporters, past gasping staff, past the stunned CEO and his furious wife. His chest burned as the sound of alarms grew louder. Nurses crowded around his son's bed, monitors screaming, oxygen tubes tangled. "His heart is crashing again," a nurse shouted. Michael's vision blurred with tears. He reached the bedside, gripping Daniel's small hand. "Stay with me, buddy. Please, don't leave me." Ella pushed in behind him, her face pale with fear but her voice steady. "You're not alone, Daniel. We're all here. Fight. Please, fight." Grant stood in the doorway, watching the battle unfold, his hands clenched. He had just given everything, yet it still might not be enough. Victoria, standing beside him, whispered bitterly, "Let him go. Nature is stronger than hope." Grant turned to her slowly, his eyes filled with disgust. "No, love is stronger than nature, and tonight you'll see it." Doctors prepared paddles again. The air thickened with dread. Michael's cries echoed, raw and heart-shattering, filling the sterile room with soul-stirring grief. Everyone froze as the first shock hit Daniel's chest. The monitor stuttered, then fell silent again. "Clear," the doctor barked. The second shock jolted the small body, and the monitor beeped weakly, a flicker of rhythm. Michael pressed his forehead against his son's hand, whispering a tear-soaked vow. "If you come back, I promise our lives will change. I will make every second count." The monitor steadied, rhythm strengthening. The room exhaled in relief, tears sliding down even the nurse's cheeks. But just as calm began to return, the doctor looked up grimly. "He's stable, for now, but unless we uncover the root cause tonight, he may not make it through the next crisis." Michael's heart lurched. He turned to the doctor. "Then do whatever it takes." The doctor hesitated. "There's one option, but it's experimental, high risk, and requires full consent. If it fails," his voice trailed off, heavy with implication. Michael's breath caught. He looked at Daniel's fragile face, then at Ella, whose eyes silently urged courage. Finally, he turned to Grant. "What would you do if this were your child?" The CEO's face tightened. He stepped closer, voice breaking with conviction. "I'd risk Eve." Michael's trembling hand hovered over the consent form, and as the pen touched paper, alarms blared again outside the ICU. Shouts of panic, footsteps racing. Something else was happening. The storm was not over. The fight for Daniel's life and for the truth had only reached its most dangerous turn. The night stretched into dawn. Shadows thinned as pale sunlight filtered through the hospital windows, painting the sterile walls gold. Michael sat rigid in the chair beside Daniel's bed, his head bowed, hands clasped as if locked in prayer. The monitors hummed with fragile steadiness, each beep a lifeline, each breath a victory. The experimental treatment had gone forward. Surgeons and specialists worked tirelessly through the night, and though the risk was terrifying, Daniel survived. His small body looked frail, but color had returned to his cheeks, and his chest rose with steady rhythm. When Michael finally opened his eyes, he saw his son sleeping peacefully, his lips parted in soft breaths. A tear slipped down his cheek, this time not of fear, but of relief. He brushed Daniel's hair back and whispered, "You fought, buddy. You really fought." Ella stood quietly in the corner, exhausted yet unwavering. Her presence had been a constant light in the darkest hours. She stepped forward now, placing a folded paper crane on Daniel's blanket. "It's a symbol of hope," she said shyly. "My mom taught me how to fold them when things felt impossible." Michael swallowed hard, his voice breaking. "You've given us more than hope, Ella. You've given us courage." The hospital, once filled with whispers of scandal, now buzzed with a new story. Nurses spoke in awe about the maid's daughter, who defied cruelty and stood for kindness. Families in waiting rooms repeated her words, passing them like scripture. Kindness isn't weakness. It's the only power that lasts. Even the city outside began to hum with the tale. Headlines shifted. Single dad's struggle inspires thousands. Maid's daughter stuns CEO's wife with powerful words. Donations poured into the hospital's children's unit. Messages of support flooded social media. Strangers offered help, meals, prayers. Michael, who had once felt invisible, became the face of resilience. Not because he sought fame, but because his story revealed something deeper. That love, stripped of everything else, was still enough to move mountains. Grant returned to the hospital days later, his shoulders heavier but his eyes softer. He approached Michael quietly, without his usual entourage, just a man carrying the weight of choices. "I've signed over funds for a permanent children's wing," he said. "Not just for Daniel, but for every child who needs care." He paused, his voice low. "I can't erase the harm my silence allowed. But maybe I can build something that outlives my mistakes." Michael studied him for a long moment. "Redemption isn't in money," he said gently. "It's in what you choose to stand for. Don't let her voice be louder than yours ever again." Grant nodded, shame flickering, but resolve settling. "You have my word." Victoria, however, could not bear the shift. Her world, once built on intimidation and flawless appearances, was cracking. She had tried to spin the narrative, to twist truth into lies, but the tide had turned against her. At one final board meeting weeks later, she lashed out, blaming others, calling the story exaggerated. But Grant rose from his seat and spoke firmly. "This company, this family, cannot survive on arrogance and cruelty. It must survive on humanity." The board fell silent. Victoria's power dissolved in that moment. The judgment of those who once feared her was clear. Her reign of disdain was over. She left the room, her diamonds catching light for the last time. Back in Brooklyn, life shifted for Michael and Daniel. Their apartment, though still modest, no longer felt like a prison of poverty, but a sanctuary of survival. The jar of coins remained on the dresser, no longer needed for bus fare, but kept as a reminder of the days they endured with nothing but grit. Daniel grew stronger with each passing week. He laughed again, his cheeks rosy, his eyes bright. One afternoon, he asked his father, "Are we rich now?" Michael smiled softly. "Richer than ever," he said, pulling his boy into a hug. "Because we have love. That's the kind of wealth nobody can take away." Ella and her mother became part of their small family circle. They visited often, bringing books, folding paper cranes, sharing dinners at the little kitchen table. The bond between them deepened, born from fire and forged into unshakable trust. And one evening, Michael organized a small dinner in their apartment, a symbolic celebration. The table was set simply: rice, chicken, vegetables, nothing extravagant. But laughter filled the room, louder than chandeliers, warmer than marble halls. Ella's mom raised a glass of water. "To kindness," she said. "To courage," Michael added. Daniel, with a grin too big for his small face, lifted his cup of juice to Ella because she made the mean lady look ridiculous. Everyone burst into laughter, even through tears. It was the kind of laughter that healed. Months later, the hospital unveiled the new children's wing. A plaque at the entrance read, "Built in honor of every child who teaches us the power of love." At the opening, Grant stood alongside Michael and Ella, his voice steady as he addressed the crowd. "This isn't about me," he said. "It's about a single dad who refused to give up, a boy who fought with courage, and a maid's daughter who reminded us all what true strength looks like." The audience erupted in applause, not for wealth, but for truth. Michael held Daniel close, his heart swelling with pride. Ella stood beside them, her chin high, her eyes bright. For once, no one looked down on her. They looked up. As the evening sun dipped low, casting warm light over the hospital's glass windows, Michael slipped a folded paper crane into his pocket. Ella had given him dozens by now, but this one felt different, like a symbol not just of survival, but of transformation. He walked outside with Daniel perched on his shoulders, the boy laughing at the sight of balloons released into the sky. For a moment, the city noise faded, and all Michael heard was the rhythm of his son's joy. He thought back to the gala, to the humiliation, to the cruel laughter, and he thought of the words that had changed everything. Kindness isn't weakness, it's the only power that lasts. Victoria lost the power she once clung to, her cruelty exposed. Grant chose redemption, using wealth for good instead of vanity. Ella, once invisible, became a symbol of bravery, her voice echoing across lives she never imagined she could touch. And Michael, the single dad who had been bullied, mocked and dismissed, stood tall, not because he became rich, but because love and kindness had carried him through fire. The final judgment of the story was clear, spoken not in courtrooms or boardrooms, but in the quiet truth of lives changed. Cruelty fades, arrogance crumbles, but kindness endures. As Michael watched Daniel chase after a balloon on the hospital lawn, his eyes filled with tears. The world had tried to break him, but instead it had taught him the greatest truth of all. In the end, love was the wealth no billionaire could ever own. From a single dad's struggle to a maid's daughter's courage, this story reminds us, kindness is the only power that lasts. If that touched you, imagine what's coming next. Stick with us here at Echoes of Hope for more heart-stirring journeys. Hit subscribe button, like the video, tap the bell, because stories matter, and so does yours. Thanks for watching.